Okay, so before the video begins, I'm actually recording this all the way at the end of the video, which is why Canada appears united here. But as I started recording this video, it started becoming like a tutorial for my channel, so yeah. This is Canadian Battle Royale. Hello, and welcome to Canadian Battle Royale. In this video, we will see what would happen if all of the Canadian provinces suddenly decided to dissociate from each other and had neutral relations to start. And we're going to be using a wheel of randomness to help us out. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Saskatchewan will be invading north. And I should mention right now, I know these borders aren't perfect. I had to draw them by hand because I couldn't find a good map of Canada online. So anyway, Saskatchewan will start invading into the Northwestern Territories. And because there's not really that many people living in the Northwestern Territories, it's going to go very well for Saskatchewan. Yeah, I should have mentioned the territories are included. I think it's kind of assumed that they're included in this series. But unlike in a lot of other people's Battle Royale series, I like to do something where countries, when they're losing a war very badly, can decide to surrender. And that's exactly what the Northwestern Territories will do. And all Saskatchewan demands is access to the Arctic Ocean, because it's just going to eventually be really good economically, given the state of global warming. So they wanted it, and now they have it. Prince Edward Island will be making an alliance with Nova Scotia. So this is a little island alliance over here. When an alliance forms, generally there's sometimes a reason, sometimes it's just because they have good relations. Here it makes sense because they're two of the smaller provinces. I think New Brunswick is smaller than Nova Scotia, but they're two of the smaller provinces of Canada. It makes sense they might be worried about being invaded by Quebec or even by Newfoundland and Labrador, so it makes sense why they're doing this. Newfoundland and Labrador will be invading northwest. So they will be attempting to invade into Quebec. And I'm going to introduce another thing I do in a lot of my videos now. And that is that a lot of times a country will be invading into another country, and they're not going to be on their own. So in this case, Ontario was the one who told them to invade. They just happened to be the first ones to do it. And Ontario wanted Quebec to be distracted in the east when they started invading so that they didn't have to do any of the heavy lifting. I usually do this when there's like a country that invades another country when they realistically don't have a chance of winning, but sometimes I just do it to make the scenario more interesting. But yeah, Quebec is going to be losing land in the east at first, before they actually move their troops here. And they're going to be moving troops into, I believe Labrador is the part that's on land and Newfoundland is the island, but I might have that backwards. Either way, they're moving troops to the mainland part of Newfoundland and Labrador, and crushing them. But never fear, Ontario is here. They're invading into the most populous parts of Quebec. I believe Quebec City is like right around here-ish. I might be wrong about that, though. Either way, Quebec is stuck. And feel free to criticize the way I say Quebec in the comments. The Ontarian invasion forces are stuck as Quebec starts pushing them back. But eventually there's kind of a stalemate here. And Newfoundland and Labrador continues to fall, deciding to fully retreat from the mainland and stick to whichever one is the island portion. I forget which one's which. And right now Quebec can invade here. They also are struggling to take back land from Ontario, who's slowly but surely invading into them. And so right now it's kind of a stalemate. And so I'm going to introduce something that I sometimes do in my videos, which is we will actually take a break from this event and roll an event. And I do reroll off camera until I get countries that aren't involved in the current event. So we'll see what happens, but we'll put this on pause for a bit. Yukon will be invading southwest. So they will be invading into British Columbia, and their forces are seemingly stronger than they should be, because the Yukon Territory has been industrializing and really trying to build up their military. They've also been attracting people to move to their country, and so they're stronger than they would be. Also, no one really lives in the northern part of British Columbia anyway. At least I don't think so. And then also they end up getting Alberta to join in on this war, which is going to make things extra difficult for British Columbia, as they're now fighting a two-front war that they're just losing in dramatically. To make things even worse, Northwest Territories, or what's left of them, will also join in on this war, and now British Columbia has 3 foes to fight against. But they will still stand strong. and basically hold these guys back and very slowly but surely whittle them down. So now there are two simultaneous wars going on in Canada, and I might as well introduce another concept that I often do in my videos. So the U.S. in this case thinks British Columbia is maybe a bit too powerful and wants to kind of take them down a peg. So although I don't let the U.S. participate in this scenario, non-participating countries are allowed to help with logistics. And so in this case, Alberta will be moving troops through the northern U.S. to invade into Vancouver, and this was not expected by British Columbia, so it gets taken over. Very quickly, the capital of British Columbia also gets taken, and pretty much most of their population is taken, and they are kind of forced to surrender after that. So now let's go back to the other scenario we were doing, because after a really long time, the stalemate is finally breaking as Ontario manages to cut off a major supply route from Quebec and is now pushing into them faster than ever. And they've also managed to convince New Brunswick to join the war on their side, leading to another front for Quebec to worry about, as Newfoundland and Labradorian troops land on the southern coast of Quebec to try and liberate their mainland territories, and at this point, Quebec will also surrender. And these are the new borders. Newfoundland and Labrador has been reduced to just Newfoundland. Ontario took a bit of land from Quebec, and New Brunswick took a bit of land from Quebec as well. Alberta will be invading east. And so they will be invading into Saskatchewan. And they actually start in the middle of Saskatchewan, not in the former Northwestern Territories part, but also not in the southern, more populated part. And they managed to reach this lake, which I don't know what it's called. And from there, Saskatchewan struggles to defend this territory, leading to Northern Territory, or Northwestern Territories joining in on this war to try and reclaim their old land back, and very successfully taking a lot of the north back from Saskatchewan, who gets pushed all the way to this lake as a boundary. Then an invasion along the U.S. border takes place, where Alberta is successfully invading Saskatchewan from there, and Saskatchewan is thinking about surrendering, but right at the last second, Manitoba joins in on the war, and they're not really aligned with the other side, but I usually just make all the invaders red. But they just kind of want to take their own piece of Saskatchewan, and so Saskatchewan will not be able to surrender and will finally be destroyed. And this is kind of the last thing that I kind of do on my channel a lot. Sometimes a country should realistically be given a chance to surrender, but I don't give it one because all of these videos end with there only being, or sometimes it's a series, end with there only being one country. It's never going to happen if countries are actually given a chance to surrender all the time. So in this case, Saskatchewan is forced to be divided up. And all three of the invading countries have expanded greatly. So now Saskatchewan has been removed from the wheel, and at this point I've basically told you everything you need to know about my channel. Hopefully you're still interested in watching to the end of the video so you know who wins, but if not, you can always explore the rest of my channel. I've got plenty of great videos on there. But for regular viewers, let's continue the scenario. Manitoba will be uniting southeast. So obviously the province/territory to the southeast of Manitoba, in this case it is a province, is Ontario. So they will be uniting into Manitoba, Ontario. Nova Scotia will be making an alliance with Manitoba, Ontario. So it seems like Quebec is back with a vengeance, and they're hungry for blood and trying to make sure they don't get invaded. Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island will strike up a deal with the most powerful Canadian province, being Manitoba, Ontario, just to ensure their continued survival. Nova Scotia will be invading northeast. So in a surprise move, Newfoundland realizes that there are troops outside of its borders right around here, and that these troops come from the Green Alliance, being these three countries. And they were not prepared for this. They obviously have a navy because they're an island, but most of their navy was up here. So as they're moving it down here, 25,000 Marines are landed on Newfoundland by mostly Nova Scotia, but also some from Manitoba, Ontario, and like 10 from Prince Edward Island. And they quickly start invading into Newfoundland, and by the time Newfoundland realizes, they've already been fully invaded and get fully annexed by Nova Scotia. We are on the top 10. Quebec will be invading Northwest. So Quebec, still looking to expand, realizes they shouldn't yet prick a war with the Green Alliance, so instead they prick a war with a much weaker neighbor, being Nunavut, or however you pronounce that. And I don't feel like individually coloring in each of these islands, so we're just going to color in the most important ones. But you know that the entirety of Nunavut is obviously participating in this war. Anyway, Quebec will immediately start sending their navy up to the main island of Nunavut, which is right here, and trying to capture the capital, which is not something I'm going to try to pronounce, but it's right over here. They also send troops to capture this island and quickly overwhelm whatever exists of the navy of Nunavut, but probably not much, and start invading into this territory, quickly splitting it in half and taking some of these islands over here before sending more troops to invade the main island from the north. Whatever existed of Nunavut's army gets fully destroyed at this point, and they only have their random land over here, at which point Northwestern Territories decides to make a move, not really allied with Quebec. They don't really care about Quebec. They just kind of want to take territory for themselves, so they start invading. And at this point, Ontario, Manitoba is told by their allies that it's probably a good idea for them to also start seizing a piece of Nunavut before it's all gone, so that they can get something out of the peace treaty. And so before long, this territory is done. And these are the new borders after the war. Nova Scotia will be invading Northwest. So, with Quebec having recently invaded Nunavut, a lot of countries are worried about what they're going to do next, and the Green Alliance is number one among this list of Quebec's enemies. And so, they will proactively declare war on Quebec. So I'm only going to color in some of these islands because they're not all going to be important in the war. Quickly, Ontarian troops will invade into Quebec, but this time they're ready, and Ontarian troops don't get nearly as far. Quebec also has an ally in New Brunswick, who very quickly joins the war on the side of Quebec and starts taking over Prince Edward Island very easily before using their forces to distract Nova Scotia so that they can't spend as many resources invading into Quebec, which they were doing over here. And eventually Quebec decides to retreat all of their troops that they had taken from the mainland as Quebec starts to invade into Newfoundland. But Nova Scotia is holding fairly steady as they've pushed New Brunswick off of their island. So we'll see how things go over there. In the northern front, things are not going very well for Quebec, who didn't really defend the territory they have. Like, most of this territory is still occupied by Ontarian forces, which is kind of why they invaded now. So, like, yeah, this is not going to go well. Also, Nunavut understands that Ontario invaded them because they had to, whereas Quebec invaded them because they wanted to, and so they're kind of more loyal to Ontario. And so this entire island kind of just starts erupting in rebellion, and Quebec is kind of just forced to let it happen, as the entire northern theater is already done for. But that's better for Quebec because it means they can consolidate their front line. And the U.S. is kind of worried about the growing power of the Ontario-Manitoba state, so they actually help Quebec by invading into here, which is near Toronto, the most populous city in all of Canada. And this forces Ontario-Manitoba to withdraw from a large portion of Quebec as they get chased back in order to deal with this. And at this point, the U.S. declares neutrality because they think that Quebec has a good chance of winning the conflict, and if they help anymore, it'll just make it easier for Quebec to win the conflict, which would lead to a massively powerful Quebec, which is not anything anyone wants. Anyways, Newfoundland is actually being defended by Nova Scotia, which leads to the people there actually being more loyal, but Prince Edward Island has been, basically there's been no effort to revive them, but a landing has been made on New Brunswick, and this is actually invading into New Brunswick fairly well, because Quebec is focusing all of their energy on the Hudson Bay area, where they're doing significantly better than anyone could have thought, because Ontario wasn't defending this area very well. However, Ontario finally does something in the south, taking a lot of the more important parts of Quebec, and even starting to help invade into New Brunswick. And Quebec realizes the reason they weren't defending this area is because it's not strategically important, and so they quickly try and cut off the forces over here, like over here. And they technically do, but by the time they've cut off these forces, they've already invaded into New Brunswick and have therefore connected with Nova Scotia. And so the ocean can now be used to fund them, and New Brunswick is kind of out of the war now. Prince Edward Island still is occupied by troops from New Brunswick, and still is not being saved, so they're probably going to get really mad at their allies. But anyway, Ontario is focused on pushing back these Quebecois troops. They also make a landing in northern Quebec where no one really lives. Labrador is also liberated by some troops landing from Nova Scotia. Finally, Prince Edward Island is liberated, but maybe it's too little too late as Quebec realizes their fate. And they probably would be given a chance to surrender, but to speed things up, we're going to say that at some point, after maybe a few partitions, they are destroyed. And this is the division of Quebec. As you can see, Nova Scotia got New Brunswick as well as all of Labrador, and Prince Edward Island got nothing, and Ontario, Manitoba is a beast, so yeah. British Columbia will invade east. So still believing themselves to be more powerful than Alberta, British Columbia wants to show the world once and for all that they're powerful, and so they invade into Alberta. And honestly, they probably are still more powerful than Alberta. They've been buffing up their military recently since they lost the last war, and they still have more population. So when they start invading into Alberta, it actually goes quite well at first. And it doesn't stop going well because the Green Alliance decides that it's time to show Alberta a lesson, even though Alberta's done nothing wrong. And so at this point, Alberta is cooked, and yeah, they lose. And they will be split among the victors like so. Yukon will be invading southeast. So they are invading into British Columbia. And at first this seems really strange because Yukon is significantly weaker than British Columbia, especially now. But then, first of all, Northwest Territories joins in on this. And second of all, and probably what's going to end up being the biggest betrayal of this video, I was going to call them Canada. Ontario, Manitoba betrays them and starts invading, cutting off this massive section to be taken by Northwest Territory. That's basically all they do for the rest of the war. The U.S. does try to help with logistics and lets British Columbia invade into here, where they actually get a pretty impressive invasion because the U.S. wants to help British Columbia. But it's not going to be enough as, first of all, they get pushed out of here, and the U.S. is really upset about that. But what are they going to do? Because British Columbia has just lost like 90% of their population, and Yukon will be able to take the rest. And thus, British Columbia has been divided up. Prince Edward Island will be invading northwest. So disillusioned by how their alliance has treated them, they will finally try to rebel. Unfortunately for them, this isn't going to go very well, as before they can even land troops in Nova Scotia, their entire country gets taken over, and they'll just be fully annexed. The Yukon will be making an alliance with Northwest Territory. So as the two unaligned territories that aren't part of the Green Alliance, these two countries think that it's probably a good idea to defend themselves. Manitoba and Ontario will be facing a rebellion. And just when you thought they had it in the bag as well. I won't say who's sponsoring this rebellion because I can't, but this rebellion will take place mostly in the northern parts of Quebec, and this rebellion is obviously for Quebecois independence. It will then spread into the parts of Newfoundland and Labrador that are part of Nova Scotia, as well as Newfoundland proper. This rebellion is very bad for the Green Alliance, who did not expect this to happen, and just to kick them while they're down, the Cyan Alliance will start a massive invasion into former British Columbian territories in Ontario, Manitoba, and Ontario, Manitoba was not expecting this, and all their troops were in the east trying to quell a rebellion that they just can't quell as it starts growing now in the south, which is a much more dangerous place for it to grow, as New Brunswick also starts to join the rebellion, and at this point all of Quebec is up in arms about this. Nova Scotia enters a panic as Prince Edward Island even rebels, and their main island is now falling as it just fell. Northwest Territories is starting to invade east, and and it seems like everything is going awry. But Ontario, Manitoba is still Ontario, Manitoba. They're insanely strong. So they've managed to push back Northwest Territories a bit and hold off them in the west while they quell the rebellion in the east. As a rebellion against the rebellion pops out in Nova Scotia, who quickly takes this land, as well as in Newfoundland, where they actually like Nova Scotia because they defended them against Quebec earlier, and so they don't really like Quebec and they do like Nova Scotia. Similarly, in the northern parts of Quebec, where the rebellion actually started, they don't like the way the rebellion has turned, as it's kind of gotten more violent against its people, and so they will rejoin with Ontario. And at this point, Ontario is actually winning, as they've been able to push these guys west, and they silently leave the war in exchange for not losing any territory. And at this point, it's kind of over for the rebellion. New Brunswick is capitulated. The Labradorian rebellion splits from the Quebecois rebellion, leading to it being very easy to take out. And from there, the Quebecois rebellion will still be a challenge for Ontario, Manitoba to deal with, but they'll be able to deal with it in the end. Northwest Territories will be uniting west. So in order to try and make themselves stronger together, the Cyan Alliance will be uniting into one country. Although it technically is just one country now, I'm going to keep it as an alliance because I think it looks good. Manitoba, Ontario will be invading west. And unfortunately for the new union, it looks like it's not going to last, as the Eastern Giant has come down upon them, first taking this island as like a warning shot, and when they don't surrender, they start a massive invasion, taking the Northwest Territories with ease, and it turns out when they're not distracted with the rebellion, these two territories are no match for Ontario. British Columbia is also invaded pretty easily, and Yukon will stand no chance. And this is actually the first time I've done this in a video, but it's very obvious that Manitoba, Ontario would win in a war against Nova Scotia. So I'm going to make it so that there's a 50-50 chance they either unite or go to war, so we can see how this is going to end. And they will be uniting. So both Nova Scotia and Ontario, Manitoba, so really 3 provinces of Canada, have won this episode. So hopefully a majority of Canadians will be happy about that. But with that, make sure to like, subscribe if you're new, comment down below if you thought that these 3 countries would win. Probably not. All that good stuff. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.